Imagine stepping into one of the most lavish palaces the world has ever seen. Gilded halls, glittering chandeliers, and now silk and satin to wrap the globe twice. But take a deeper breath and yaud, hit with a stench so foul it could wilt a bouquet of roses at 20 paces. Yes, welcome to the Grand Palace of Versailles in the 17th century. A place where beauty met brutality, elegance danced with filth, and royal women, for all their jewels and titles, endured. A hygiene horror show you won't believe today. We dive head first, metaphorically, thank goodness, into the shockingly unsanitary lives of noble women at the height of French royal power. These are the 5 worst hygiene habits of royal women, and you're not ready if you were a bathing woman of noble birth in 17th century France. You were expected to display grace, charm, and flawless fashion. But when it came to personal hygiene, things took a rather unpleasant turn, because bathing, the very thing we associate with cleanliness today, was often avoided. Liketh plague. You see, the science of that time hadn't caught up with common sense. Doctors believed that warm water was not your friend, but your enemy. They thought it dangerously opened your pores to disease, inviting in unseen threats that lurked in the air. Add to this the powerful voice of the church, which condemned baths as dens of vanity and temptation. And what you had was an entire culture slowly turning its back in water. Women didn't have private baths or the luxury of daily showers. In fact, they rarely bathed at all. A full body wash was considered unnecessary, risky, or even sinful. Instead, most nobles, including royal women, would use a damp cloth to wipe their hands, faces, and perhaps their necks. But these weren't water-soaked towels. They were often moistened with alcohol, vinegar, or even saliva, which supposedly helped clean without exposing the skin too. Much to make matters even more disheartening, when it was time for a bath, and that was rare, it was usually a communal event. Families would bathe in the same tub of water, one after the other, and who got to go first? The men, of course. By the time a woman entered the tub, the water would be lukewarm, cloudy, and filled with residue. That's if there was even water left to soak in the effect. On the royal palace, let's just say that the smell didn't stop at the stables. Visitors often commented on the overpowering scent that drifted through the halls of Versailles, a strange mixture of old perfume, body odor, animal fat, and mildew. It wasn't that the royals didn't care about appearances. They just had very different ideas about what was considered clean for women, especially who were expected to be paragons of beauty and sophistication. The contradiction was the most cruel, wrapped in silks way down, with jewelry and powdered to perfection, but underneath skin that hadn't seen soap in months. It was thievery definition of looking good from afar and far from good up close. Now, if toilets' lack of bathing wasn't enough, the next hygiene habit, or rather, the complete lack of one, is something we really take for granted today: toilets. The Palace of Versailles was a marvel of architecture, dripping with luxury, housing the most powerful people in Europe. But here's the kicker: it had almost no proper toilets. That's right, hundreds of rooms, thousands of guests, and barely a functioning bathroom in sight. Instead, the royal court relied on chamber pots, small portable bowls placed under beds, behind curtains, or in closets. When nature called, you used your pot, and then, well, someone, if not you, tossed it out the window. If the wind wasn't fortunate or the street below too crowded, someone might get a very nasty surprise. And some courtiers didn't even bother with pots. Men were known to urinate off balconies or relieve themselves in the palace gardens. Visitors and foreign dignitaries were appalled at what they witnessed. It wasn't just a few incidents, it was systemic. The palace was infamous for its overwhelming stench, and the corridors often doubled as improvised toilets. Imagine Being a lady in waiting, gliding through the halls in your elaborate gown, lifting your skirts carefully, not just to show off your embroidery, but to avoid stepping in human waste. In fact, it got so bad that by 1715, a royal decree had to be issued stating that the palace riders were to be cleaned once a week, not daily, not after an event, just once a week, because that was considered an improvement. And let's talk about wiping. Modern conveniences like toilet paper didn't exist. Instead, people used cloth scraps, leaves, straw, or in desperate cases their own hands. Washing up afterward was minimal, if at all. And when your waste disposal system was a window wand, your cleaning method was questionable at best. Well, it's no wonder parasites and disease ran rampant. Wigs. If Versailles was the heart of Europe's fashion obsession, its pulse beat strongest in the wigs and hairstyles of royal women. These weren't just everyday hairdos. These were architectural estive hairstyles, towered feet above the head, adorned with ribbon spirals, miniature gardens, and even tiny ships. That's right, ships. Realistic replicas set atop a woman's head, riding the waves of powdered curls. To achieve such scale, women stuffed their hair with everything from wireframes and horsehair to padding made of wool or cotton. Then once the basic form was achieved, they applied liberal amounts of pomade made from animal fat, particular beef tallow. This helped mold and hold the style in place. But that grease also made for a warm, sticky, and very attractive home for lice, because women didn't wash their hair often, and certainly didn't remove their elaborate wigs for casual cleaning. Lice infestations were not just common, they were expected. Entire colonies of the little critters thrived within those towering styles. Ladies of the court used special tools, long-handled silver lice claws, to scratch their itchy scalps without ruining their appearance. These claws were delicately ornate and often brought to dinners or social events where a woman might pause between sips of wine to give her head a discreet scratch. Despite the discomfort, no one dared skip the fashion parade. In the rigid hierarchy of court life, appearance was power, and to appear out of fashion or poorly dressed was to risk losing your status. Even if your scalp was crawling with lice and your hair reeked of old fat, the show had to go on. Wigs weren't just uncomfortable and unsanitary, they were also dangerous. Some were so heavy they caused chronic neck pain. Others caught fire from nearby candles. But all were the price of maintaining one's position at court. For poor women, there was no such burden. They simply shaved their heads to avoid lice altogether. But for noble women, their hair was their crown, even if it was shedding a whole ecosystem underneath foodlets. Now turn our attention to something that should have brought joy: food. After all, royal banquets were legendary, tables groaning with meat, peace pastries, roasted pheasants, and sugar-red fruits. But lurking behind the luxury was a dark stomach-churning reality. The royal kitchens weren't immune to the palace's sanitation issues. In fact, they were often the victims of them. The plumbing system at Versailles was so poor that raw sewage would sometimes back up into the cooking areas. It's been reported that at least once wastewater reached the private kitchen of Queen Marie Antoinette. The impact on food safety was devastating. Without proper refrigeration, ventilation, or waste removal, contamination was common. Meat spoiled quickly, fruits and vegetables were left out. For days, pests roamed freely. And yet the cooks had no choice but to carry on serving potential hazardous meals to the highest ranks of society. The consequences to extreme distress was rampant diarrhea, vomiting, and infections were common, but the most horrifying were the parasites. Royal courtiers were frequently infected with intestinal worms, especially tapeworms, thanks to undercooked meats and filthy kitchen conditions. Even the mighty Louis XIV wasn't spared. He is said to have passed 6 in long tapeworm, a grim reminder that even the most powerful man in France was not above the consequences of poor hygiene. For the women of the court, dining was a delicate performance. They were expected to eat gracefully, to chaten, flirt, to toast, and entertain, but behind the elegant facade, many battled nausea, cramps, and more serious illnesses, silently to maintain appearances. Childbirth. Finally, we arrive at what may be the most intimate and painful part of a woman's life: childbirth. And for royal women, it wasn't just painful, it was public. In 17th century France, when a queen or high-ranking noble woman went into labor, it was considered a national event. Literally, the delivery room would be filled with courtiers, doctors, priests, and noble observers, all there to watch, not assist, not support, watch. When Queen Marie Therese gave birth, room was so packed that it resembled a theater more than a medical ward. Their as in royal births had to be witnessed to prevent scandal. People feared that a stillborn or female baby might be swapped out for a healthy male heir, so the entire process had to happen in full view. This meant that the mother, likely in excruciating pain and emotional distress, was surrounded by an audience during one of the most vulnerable months of her life. There was no privacy, no dignity, just expectation. Marie Antoinette famously passed out after giving birth due to the oppressive, an overwhelming crowd in her chamber. She wasn't the only one. Many women fainted, cried, or suffered complications, all while being watched like a performance on stage. And childbirth was far from safe. With limited medical knowledge and no access to antibiotics, 1 in 3 children died before the age of 3. Mothers also faced high mortality rates, especially from infections caused by unwashed hands and unsterile tools. So while royal births were moments of national celebration, they were also marked by immense fear and physical suffering. The emotional toll on women who had to bear children under pressure, surveillance, and threat was staggering. So there you have it, 5 grotesque conclustren from the golden halls of the sighs beneath the glittering gowns, perfume-drenched halls, and jeweled crowns. Royal women lived lives filled with discomfort, indignity, and dangers that would make modern readers squirm. They were thefts of grace and sophistication in public, but in private they scratched, suffered, and survived in ways history often forgets to mention. If you thought royal life was all ball gowns and banquets, think again. The real story, much messier and far more human. Until next time, keep exploring the past, because history isn't just fascinating, sometimes it's downright filthy.